Shalom, family. Good to see you all here. Hope you're doing well. All right, we're going to talk about the latest developments that have been coming out of Australia. And Australia is not the only place. This is going to be happening worldwide because of the Straits of Hormuz not really being open and functional. Now, there are a few authorized ships that can go in and out of there, like China, Japan, I believe India, but there's a lot of people that can't go in there at all. And some can't get in there because their oil tanker no longer have insurance. I said this during my first live. During the time of war, it is not unusual for insurance companies to cancel the policies on these oil tankers in fear that it may get bombed. They don't want to pay for those. Oil tankers are multi-million dollars. So they don't want to shell out for that. So what they do is they will cancel the policy, and when things seems to calm down in the region, they can get insurance again. And without insurance, the boats can't move. They have to remain stationary. So the majority of the ships out there don't have the insurance to go in there and come out. So that in itself is a problem. So that means countries all around the globe are not going to get their oil. Now, the average each country have a reserve. The reserve is usually for 90 days. What the hell? Somebody's knocking on my damn door. Hold on, y'all. All right, y'all. I don't know. So anyway, back to this. What I was saying was, I'm trying to go back to what I was talking about. Um, when the ships are not insured, they can't just sail into the Straits of Hormuz because if it gets bombed or get hit with a drone, there's no insurance to cover it. So, that's why most companies that have tankers out there will tell their people just leave the ship where it is. So it's a bunch of ships out there with no insurance right now. And so they're not going to move or do anything until they're given, the nod by whoever owns it and says it's insured again and they can go through there. So it's been bad for um it's been bad for Australia. So I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. So anyway, y'all, please, okay, thank you for the ones.
Hey, check this out. So the survey's closed. That's the third one today I've seen that shut, right? There's no fucking, I walked in there because there's one guy in there. He goes, we cannot get fuel. Yeah. So it's gone from 36 days reserved to 20 and they're already fucking closing. That's the third one today, mate. So fucking go get your jerry cans and put in 20 litres of fucking unleaded because that's what you're going to have to use, you fucking.
There are fresh calls to either reduce or wipe public transport fares as Australians continue to feel the squeeze of pumped up fuel prices and decreasing supply. It comes as 6 oil tankers set to carry fuel into Australia next month have been turned back, with only 74 of around 80 scheduled fuel shipments to now arrive. The government is refusing to invoke emergency powers despite persistent shortages, with the International Energy Agency pushing people to avoid the roads and work from home.
Australia has just 36 days worth of petrol. We should have 90, and most countries do, making them ready for supply shocks like wars. And it could mean Aussies will be paying more at the pump.
How much diesel in days do we currently have in store on Australian soil?
The answer to the question is 34 days in relation to diesel, 32 days in relation to jet fuel, and 36 days in relation to petrol.
That was on Monday, the government confirming we're not ready for a major shock to the oil market. We're pretty dependent on imported fuel to keep the country running. That's just not filling up your car, but also things like keeping ambulances running and refrigerating groceries. The International Energy Agency, which Australia is a member of, says countries need to keep 90 days worth of fuel stocks in case supplies are cut off, to be ready to collectively respond to severe supply disruptions affecting the global oil market. But those numbers from Energy Minister Chris Bowen, well, that includes fuel that is yet to make it ashore.
And it's a reasonable point of clarification, Mr. Speaker. Those figures only include fuel in Australia or on ships in our economic zone. Only that is what it's included, not ships that are some way away, whether they be in the Middle East or Singapore or the Gulf of Mexico. That is fuel in our exclusive economic zone.
20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Most of Australia's refined oil comes through Singapore, but any impact to global supply hits prices everywhere. On Friday, a barrel of oil was $73. On Monday, 77. After the Iranian Revolution in 1979, a massive shock to oil supply saw Australian Bowser prices increase by almost 40%. Experts say this time we could see fuel prices jump by 10% in the next week. But if this conflict drags out, it could get a lot worse.
Completely unprepared for this.
The International Energy Agency mandates members stockpile at least 90 days of oil supply for emergencies. Where are we?
34 days in relation to diesel, 32 days in relation to jet fuel, and 36 days in relation to petrol.
And Chris Bowen says that's the highest it's been for 15 years.
Australia is only a couple of weeks away from declaring a national emergency when it comes to its oil supply. And the most worrying part of the story is how quickly the government's tone has rapidly changed. Just days ago, the messaging coming out of Canberra was that everything was fine, that fuel supplies were stable, that ships were arriving on schedule, and that the only real issue was people panic buying more than what they needed. But overnight, that tone has shifted dramatically. Now the government is talking about revising policies, releasing reserves, relaxing fuel standards, and preparing contingency plans in case the situation worsens. And when governments start talking like that, what they are really saying is that they have realized the problem is far bigger than what they initially admitted. because the reality right now is that Australia's fuel system is sitting on top of a ticking time bomb that could explode the moment global supply chains tighten even slightly. And it's not just Australia that is suddenly worried. Trump initially claimed the conflict in the Middle East could be wrapped up extremely quickly. Now even the US is warning that the situation could escalate further and is asking other countries to help pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Because if that shipping lane stays restricted, around 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply is suddenly at risk. And that is exactly where Australia's problem becomes extremely serious. Yes, the Iran crisis may have triggered the current tension in global oil markets, but the reality is that Australia was never in a strong position to absorb a shock like this in the first place.
Australia is officially on a 36-day timer. With the Strait of Hormuz slammed shut following the conflict in Iran, our most critical oil choke point is gone. We import 90% of our fuel. While other nations keep 90 days in reserve, Australia is down to its final 5 weeks. For diesel, the clock is even shorter, just 34 days. Without it, the trucks that feed our supermarkets and the tractors that harvest our crops simply stop. At the pump, Sydney and Melbourne have already seen spikes toward $2.80. Panic buying is draining what's left, and the government is now weighing the first emergency rationing in decades. Next time you fill up, remember, Australia is at the end of a very long, very fragile straw.
Should Australia reduce the fuel excise to help struggling Aussies around the country, let alone small businesses? What about talk of a mandated work from home? Let's tackle this. So firstly, the last time Australia actually reduced this fuel excise was back in 2022. So on 30th of March 2022, because we were living through a cost of living crisis, the federal government at the time reduced the fuel excise by 50%. It went from 44.2 cents per litre down to 22.1 cents per litre for 6 months. This ended on 28th of September 2022. At present, as at August 2025, the fuel excise is currently sitting at 51.6 cents per litre. Will the government pull this lever? Well, the category.
Do y'all notice how cheap gas is everywhere except for the US? In Australia, they're not even paying a full dollar per gallon for gas. And even before the war, we were paying more than that. And I told you what Canada was paying prior to the war, $1.60 per gallon. We got to be the most ripped off people on the face of the earth. I guess every wicked rich person must live here. They must live right here. This is absolutely unbelievable. But y'all, this crisis is going to be global. And see, I'm showing you this because, see, these folks like this assume nothing is going to happen. But you know what? Judgment is coming to Australia too. You saw what they did. That was a prison colony. And you saw what they did to the Aborigine in history. So there's a lot of judgment coming on Australia as well. They're colonized. People like her are the colonizers. So let's go on.
Categorically ruling this out. So Treasurer Jim Chalmers made the government's position clear last week. He stated, when it comes to the fuel excise, that is not something that we've been considering. Of course it's not. This is because government spending is out of control. We have no savings for a rainy day. There's no buffer. Now, I'm not just calling out this federal government, I'm calling out all governments around Australia, and I'm going to call out any government that does this, regardless of what party it is. Currently, government spending is at 27% GDP. It should be between 24 to 25%. This is overspending of 2% per year, costing us $52 billion. So when we are in a crisis like this, that is not of our doing, a Middle East war, we don't have anything, any buffer, any savings for a rainy day. They can't step in and do this when everybody is screaming out for help and support. It's just not good enough. So let's talk about the mandated work from home. So I need you to understand that this is just talk and just a recommendation. There is no indication whatsoever that they're going to bring this in. So a report from International Energy Agency on Friday recommended Australia, along with many other countries, to enforce or explore a mandated work from home policy. As I said, to date, there is no indication of this, purely because we have no buffer, we have no savings. They would need to compensate small businesses around the country if they did this. So Energy Minister Chris Bowen suggested cash-strapped Aussies look to work from home more often than driving in. What can you say to that recommendation? The only lever that the government has pulled at the moment is they've announced a fuel supply task force coordinator, Anthea Harris. She will lead the fuel supply task force across federal, state and territory governments. Is this good enough? Is this going to get us out of the crisis that we're in? Where is this fuel price going to go to? And are we going to have shortages? I want to hear your thoughts on this. If you haven't already done so, hit the follow button for more.
This is getting really bad here in Australia. New South Wales, look at this. Sky News reporting that 100 service stations literally have run out of diesel. And of course, here in Melbourne, I've driven around, metropolitan area, and on the way into the office have literally seen multiple service stations out of diesel. This is bad. Now they are also saying that we have, as a country, only 30 days worth of reserves, which is even worse. The Australian government has now reached out to its partners in Asia, aka China, to try and get oil and fuel from them. I just can't understand why such a mineral-rich country has these issues. Too busy exporting overseas for profits. Also, the excise or tax on fuel that the government has put on years ago, they haven't given any relief. What the hell is going on in this country? Yes, I know what's going on in the Middle East. It's very, very bad, but things are going to be starting to look like, lockdown 2.0 in a minute. Everyone's going to be working from home because there's just simply no fuel. Very scary. Listen to this interview, I should say, on Channel 9 News.
Elbow is hitting the phones because we've only got a month left in the bank of our fuel resources, with Iran effectively choking the Strait of Hormuz. So we're being warned that supply from the Middle East will become more disrupted. That follows 6 tankers which were bound for our shores that have now been cancelled. So to keep oil flowing to Australia, the Prime Minister has been hitting the phones, calling on those partners in Asia, basically to scratch our backs in our time of need.
They receive energy from us. We receive liquid fuels from them. We're doing everything we can to get supply back into Australia.
Australians are now being urged to drive slower and to work from home. That warning coming from the International Energy Agency. Ironically, that big boss will be meeting with the Prime Minister later today when he speaks at the National Press Club.
Okay, so y'all, this is a big mess. And what they were talking about, rationing gas, If you remember back in the 70s, even if you weren't alive, you might have heard about it. They had to ration gas here, and they did it based on whether you had an odd or even tag. So they would have odd days, and cars that had a number that ended in an odd number, they could get gas on the odd days. Anybody that had a tag with an even number on the end, then you would go on the even days. Now, here's the funny part. My dad had two cars. One car had an odd tag, one car had an even tag. So he could go all of the days because of that. But that's what they're talking about for Australia. That's what they're talking about. They may have to ration the gas because they have used up 54 days of their 90-day reserve. And it's no telling how long it's going to be. You got to figure, even if the tanker gets the oil and everything they need, you got to filter in the travel time from the Middle East to Australia by that oil tanker. So, that's going to take some time in itself. But I want you to always remember, this would not be going on if Donald Trump and Netanyahu didn't start a war with Iran. You see how it's impacting the entire globe? And you see, Donald Trump does this, and now he's running around talking about negotiating and getting the straits open because a lot of people are mad at Donald Trump. A lot of countries are mad at Donald Trump right now. And they're not happy at all. Well, apparently nobody is saying he's dead anymore. I think he did a press conference the other day, like a few days ago. So anyway, y'all, it doesn't matter if that man is dead or alive. I mean, look how long he disappeared, which tells you he's going to probably disappear like that all throughout the war because he doesn't want to get what the Ayatollah got. Yeah. So anyway, look, y'all, Australia gonna be going through it. But I'm gonna keep up with this story to see when they completely run out. Now they're trying to look to other countries to get fuel up in there, but they haven't said that somebody was gonna come in there and supply them with fuel. They didn't say nothing. And yes, I did hear about Russia was on their way to send and give fuel to Cuba. I did hear about that. Now, the last time they tried, they got intercepted by the US on Donald Trump's instruction not to give them anything because he wants to starve those people out. This man is so wicked. So, anyway, Russia is on their way to try to give them fuel so they can get their power back on. So, whether they make it there and they're able to give them food, they're supposed to be giving them fuel and other supplies to help them out. So, y'all, thank you for being here. Now, I do have one more live that's going to be at 5:45. And what this is about is Ghana just addressed the UN for transatlantic slave reparations. So you'll get all the details when you come back at 5:45. So I will see you then, ladies and gentlemen. Shalom, family.